Now, you wouldn't think that Psalms would be prophetic, but they are, just like the majority of the Bible. Psalm 83 was written about 3,000 years ago by Asaph, who was King David's worship leader. And that's found in 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verses 4 and 5. And also he was a prophet, which is in 2 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 30. Well, he wrote 12 of the Psalms, and the most prophetic of which was Psalm 83, and that was the last one that he wrote. Now here's an interesting factoid. On July 26, 2006, a Latin translation of the Book of Psalms was found in an Irish bog by construction workers. It is known as the Irish Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's 1,200 years old, and as you can imagine, it was in pretty bad shape, except for one page. And that's the page that it was laying open to, and that page was perfectly preserved. Now guess what was written on that page? Psalm 83. Nothing is a coincidence in God's kingdom. And I believe that this psalm could be meant for us today. Now, there is a little controversy over Psalm 83. Several highly respected prophecy scholars believe that this has already been fulfilled in stages, starting with the 1948 Israeli War of Independence, and also partially fulfilled in the 1967 Six-Day War, and also in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. However, many equally respected Bible scholars also think that the requirements of the psalm was only partially fulfilled. And I tend to agree with that. I think that what happened in those three wars kind of sort of fulfill a lot of the prophecy, but not all of it. And in order for a prophecy to be fulfilled, every little detail has to occur. So I don't think that these three wars totally fulfill the requirements of what's in Psalm 83. And I'll point these shortcomings out a little later as we go. So let's read Psalm 83, verses 1 through 8. O God, do not remain quiet. Do not be silent, and, O God, do not be still. For behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people, and conspire together against your treasured ones. They have said, come, let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they have conspired together with one mind. Against you they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also has joined them. They have become a help to the children of Lot. So, who is it that's in this confederacy? Well, we have a map here that I'll show you who is involved. Now this picture shows the Arab Confederacy of Psalm 83. And as you can see, we've got the Ishmaelites and the Moabites and the Hagrites and the Termites and the Gigabites and all sorts of bites. Well, let's go through the people that Asaph mentions and see what we call them today. The list starts with the tents of Edom. Now, you don't see it on the map here, but in every one of these countries around Israel, there are refugee camps still today. And they are the result of the displacement of the original Palestinian Arabs after these three wars that we talked about with Israel. Now, let's see. Lost my place. This is terrible. I hate it when I lose my place. Okay, so so the reason that they're doing all this is because they want to wipe Israel off the map. You know, in verse 5 said they conspired together with one mind against you to make a covenant. For they have said, come, let us wipe them out as a nation, so the name of Israel may be remembered no more. And then later in the psalm, in verse 12, it says, the nobles and their princes who have said, let us possess for ourselves the pastures of God. So all these people are inspired or deceived by irrational satanic hatred of Israel. They don't want a two-state solution. They want to destroy Israel and take the land and form a Palestinian state in its place. Now, let's read the rest of Psalm 83 here, and this is verses 9 through 18. Deal with them as Midian, as with Sisera and Jabin at the brook of Kishon, who were destroyed at Endor, who became as the dung of the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, and all their princes like Zeban and Zalmunna, who said, let us possess for ourselves the pastures of God. O my God, make them like the whirling dust, like chaff before the wind, like fire that burns the forest, and like the flame that sets the mountains on fire. So pursue them with your tempest, and destroy them with your storm. Fill their faces with dishonor, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and dismayed forever, and let them be humiliated and perish, that they may know that you alone, whose name is the Lord, are the Most High over all the earth. So we see from verse 9 on to the end of the psalm, Asaph calls on God to deal with these groups and their leaders. And he says, remember what you did with Midian and those guys? Do it to these guys. Well, the prophecy is describing a conflict between the Arabs, radical Islam, and Israel. The IDF wins this war, and Israel annexes all the territory of their Arab enemies. Now, it's interesting, all these Termites and Ishmaelites and all that stuff, when you read prophecy in the Bible, usually when you have a list, the first thing on the list is the most important thing. And so the first thing we see in that list of countries around Israel is the tents of Edom. Well, it's interesting that the Bible doesn't say, or Asaph in the Bible doesn't say the Edomites. He calls everybody else ites, but not the Edomites. And there's a reason. Every detail in the Bible has a reason. He says it's the tents of Edom. And that's because the Edomites that he's talking about right now are living in tents in these refugee camps all around Israel. And since they're mentioned first, they must be the key to all this. And so usually in the Bible, when the Bible refers to tents, it's either as military encampments or as refugees. And we see that these guys are refugees. The Edomites are descendants of Esau, who was Jacob's brother. And they're the Philistine refugees who fled during these wars. And now they're stuck in these refugee camps in all of the surrounding Arab nations. And it's interesting that since they're Arabs and they're Islamic and they're supposed to be the Islamic Brotherhood, whatever, all these nations around them failed to let them assimilate into their cultures. They all keep them hemmed into these refugee camps for years and years now. Well, so the establishment of a Palestinian state for these refugees has been the central issue causing unrest for decades, with the Islamic leaders calling for jihad or holy war to do it. So next we hear about the Ishmaelites, And these are the Bedouin people of northern Saudi Arabia. Now Ishmael, as you'll remember, was the father of the Bedouin Arab people. Then the Moabites, there are Palestinians, which are represented in a lot of these peoples, and also Central Jordanians. The Hagarites are Egyptians, and Hagar, if you remember, was the Egyptian matriarch. Gabal, which is up around Lebanon, north of Syria, and that's Hezbollah. And they are pretty much ruling authority in Lebanon right now. They brag about having over 150,000 rockets and over 9,000 attack drones that are all targeted Israel. And by the way, they're all supplied by Iran. Then we hear about Ammon. The Philistines, or the Palestinians, again, are representative of the children of Ammon, and also northern Jordanians. And actually, Amman, Jordan is the capital of Jordan, and that's where the Ammonites are. Amalek, who are the Arabs in the Egyptian Sinai desert, south of Israel, all the way to the Nile, and they are basically the Islamic Brotherhood. Then Philistia is mentioned, and that's Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and they have over 100,000 rockets and attack drones, all targeted Israel, of course, and again, they're supplied by Iran. Now notice where Gaza is, and you might have noticed on the map there that Gaza is a little bitty area on the Mediterranean, on the eastern side of Israel, right in the middle of Israel. And we'll kind of get to that a little later. The inhabitants of Tyre, and Tyre is in the northern part of, or the southern part of Lebanon, north of Syria, on the Mediterranean, and that would be Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Then Assyria, which is now Syria and Iraq, and they have weapons supplied by Iran, all facing Israel. They've become a help to the children of Lot, who are the Ammonites that I mentioned in Jordan. So as you can see, these conspirators are the immediate neighbors of Israel. They're all radical Islamic neighbors, and all armed and funded by Iran. So we talked a little bit about why they're doing this. They're going to come against Israel because they don't like Israel. They're going to wipe it off the map. And so then this prophecy is describing the final conflict between the Arabs, which is radical Islam, and Israel. Like I said, the IDF wins this war, and Israel annexes all these territories. Now this goes from Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and all the way down into Egypt, from the Nile over to Israel, and a little bit of Saudi Arabia in there to the south of Israel in the Sinai. So they will also possess the Gaza Strip, where Hamas has literally been a thorn in their side. And like I pointed out, Hamas is in the Gaza Strip right on the side of Israel there. And the entire West Bank over to Jordan, which is Samaria. And this will expand Israel to include most of the land that was originally given by God to Israel. So now, let's read Obadiah 1, verses 18 through 20. Now, Obadiah, you go to Amos and turn right. So, Obadiah 18, or verse 18, then the house of Jacob will be as a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau will be as stubble, and they will set them on fire and consume them, so that there will be no survivor of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. Then those of the Negev will possess the mountains of Esau, and those of the Sephalah, the Philistine plain, also possess the territory of Ephraim and the territory of Samaria, and Benjamin will possess Gilead. And the exiles of the host of the sons of Israel, who are among the Canaanites as far as Zepharah, and the exiles of Jerusalem, who are in Sepharad, will possess the cities of the Negev. So you can see that that Israel is going to take over this entire area. And it's said in other places of the Bible that during this time that 3 cities in Egypt on the eastern side of the Nile will speak Hebrew. So, earlier I pointed out some of the reasons that I think Psalm 83 has not already been totally fulfilled. So here they are. Israel's military is currently the 10th strongest in the world, but not really what you would call exceedingly great. Well, after Psalm 83 and all the defeat of all these Arabs, they will have proven to be the major military power in the region and could be said to be an exceedingly great army, as described in Ezekiel 37, verse 10. Also, other places in the Bible describe that also. So let's now read Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 25 and 26. Thus says the Lord, when I gather the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they are scattered, and will manifest my holiness in them in the sight of the nations, then they will live in their land, which I gave to my servant Jacob. They will live in it securely, and they will build houses, plant vineyards, and live securely when I execute judgment upon all those who scorn them round about them. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God. Now, also, I want to read, and there's no slide for this, but I want to read Ezekiel 38, verses 11 and 12. Now, this is God speaking to Gog of Magog. And you will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will go against those who are at rest, that live securely, and all them living without walls and having no bars nor gates, to capture spoil and to seize plunder. So, did you catch that? Everybody in those verses is talking that Israel is living securely, many times. They also live without bars, walls, or gates. Now, because that Israel is now under constant threat from the Islamic terrorists, they are the most walled country in the entire world, with checkpoints everywhere. They cannot afford to let down their guard because of Arab terrorist threat. Well, at the time of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog-Magog invasion, we just saw that Israel is said to be dwelling securely without walls, bars, or gates. So that hasn't happened yet. So that's one of the reasons why I think that those wars that Israel fought against their Arab neighbors are not yet fulfilling the total Psalm 83. But after Psalm 83, the IDF and Israel takes care of all these Arab extremists that are their neighbors. So they're no longer a threat to Israel, and they can dismantle all those walls and get rid of all the checkpoints that they now have throughout their country. So the second reason that I think is that Israel has not fulfilled the Psalm 83 prophecy yet is that they, after the Psalm 83, they'll have this big, huge buffer of land around them, between them and the rest of the countries. And they will have gotten rid of all their Arab neighbors that want to kill them. So they will be dwelling securely in the land, which they're not doing now. So after Psalm 83 also, they'll be able to enjoy their growing wealth and prosperity, like from the vast gas and oil reserves that they have, and all the other stuff that we mentioned in my Ezekiel 38 sermon. This will set the stage for the next tier of enemies that they'll have to face in Ezekiel 38 and 39, who come to take spoil. So notice the difference. Psalm 83 says that they're coming to wipe Israel off the map because they just don't like Israel. Ezekiel 38 and 39, the people that invade Israel come to take spoil. So that's two separate wars, two separate prophecies, two separate happenings. So Psalm 83 is not Gog-Magog war. So I think Psalm 83 is very close to happening. Last month, Israel conducted the largest joint military-civilian drill in their history. It involved every branch of the IDF, as well as mass civil defense drills all throughout the country that lasted several weeks. The express purpose of these drills was to prepare Israel for a war with Iran. Iran, you say? Weren't we just talking about the Arab-Israeli war? Iran isn't Arabic, it's Persian. Well, yeah, that's true. But as I mentioned when we were going through the countries that are around Israel that will attack Israel during Psalm 83, most of them, if not all, are funded and armed by Iran. Iran is the main troublemaker in the Middle East. And remember, the Psalm 83 people that we identified were all armed and funded by Iran. Iran has publicly stated that their official goal is to wipe Israel off the map. Sound familiar? They have vowed to destroy the great Satan, that's us, and the little Satan, that's Israel. So, there's another prophecy that might come before Psalm 83. Now, Psalm 83, like I say, is on the verge of happening, but there might be one that's going to trigger it. And that would be the disaster in Iran. Now, let's read Jeremiah 49, verses 35 through 39. Thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I am going to break the bow of Elam at the finest of their might. I will bring upon Elam the four winds from the four ends of heaven, and I will scatter them to all these winds, and there will be no nation to which the outcasts of Elam will not go. So I will shatter Elam before their enemies and before those who seek their lives, and I will bring calamity upon them, even my fierce anger, declares the Lord, and I will send out the sword after them until I have consumed them. Then I will set my throne in Elam and destroy out of it kings and princes, declares the Lord. But it will come about in the last days that I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares the Lord. So this prediction identifies a disaster that's going to happen in the ancient territory of Elam. Now I've got a slide here that we'll see where Elam actually is. As you can see, it's on the western part of Iran, next to the Persian Gulf. And it's separated from the rest of Iran. Can't really see it on the map, but there's a big mountain range that runs along here between the Elam territory and the rest of Iran. Put that in your memory banks. We'll get back to that mountain range later because that'll be important. So anyway, the disaster that we're talking about here is so catastrophic that everyone in this entire region of Elam will be forced to leave. So what could be so dangerous that everybody in that big area would have to leave? Well, a massive nuclear incident would do it. When it happens, those mountains that I mentioned will keep the radioactivity from spreading to the rest of Iran. Well, it just so happens to be where the Bushehr nuclear plant is located, nuclear reactor. And Russia is currently working with Iran to build 2 more reactors right in that area. Bushehr 2 in 2024 is supposed to come online, and then Bushehr 3 that's supposed to come online in 2026. Now, this area is also where Iran is building their nuclear weapons. Oh, by the way, this area also is where 3 geologic tectonic faults converge. Probably not important, but anyway. So why do I think that this is about to happen? Well, a couple of months ago, Iran successfully launched their first satellite into orbit. Well, that's the hard part, getting something to orbit. Now, the only thing they need to do is stick a nuke on top of that rocket, and they have an ICM that could reach anywhere on Earth in a matter of minutes. Now remember their vow for the destruction of the great Satan? That's what they're working for. Oh, breaking news. As of last Wednesday, reports say that Iran now has enough weapons-grade uranium to build 5 nuclear warheads. So this is the red line that Israel will not allow Iran to cross. Do you know Israel has a history of blowing up nuclear reactors? Remember, they clobbered Saddam Hussein's Asaric reactor back in the 80s? Just saying. So, I earlier said that I would point out what is about to happen, and I think that this attack on Iran, on the Elam region, Jeremiah 49, is about to happen. So be looking for a serious intervention from Israel against these nuclear facilities. This could be the start of the fulfillment of the Psalm 83 prophecy. You know, the purpose of those drills that I mentioned that Israel was doing, not only is military, but civilian, was to prepare Israel for an attack on Iran. Now, Iran's got nukes now, within days probably. Israel has to get rid of the nukes because Iran says, as soon as I get a nuke, I'm going to throw it at you. So they can't afford to wait. But Israel also knows that the first thing that's going to happen when they start bombing those reactors is that Iran is going to turn on all their allies around Israel to start throwing all those rockets and drones at Israel. So that's why there was a joint military-civilian massive drill to get civilians ready for all these rockets and bombs coming from Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Brotherhood and everybody else that Iran has been arming. So that was the whole thing. And that's why I think that that's going to happen first, then Psalm 83. So be looking for the news. It's getting close, folks. So it seems like every time I get up here, I keep talking about wars. Well, I am called to be a watchman, and these are the last days, and unfortunately, that's what the Lord has in store for the world. But Jesus said in Luke 21, verse 28, when you see these things start to come to pass, look up, for your redemption is drawing near. You may be thinking, well, how do we handle all this? I am so glad you asked. Jesus is the answer to all of this. Jesus is written as the book, or the reason that this book was written. This book is about Jesus. This book is Jesus. Every prophecy, every nuance, everything in this book talks about Jesus. And the reason is so that we would know when these things are starting to happen. Because we're not to be asleep, we're to be watching so that the thief doesn't come at night and break in. So we will know, but they who are not watching will not know and be taken by surprise. So we need to trust in Jesus because he is the one that came to give us salvation, to give us hope, to take us out of this mess that's going to be happening. And I think that the rapture is imminent. It's always been imminent, but I think right now, if you read the signs, we don't have very long, folks. And our command by our Lord is to get out and spread the gospel. And we don't have much time to do that, so we need to get off our butt and get doing it. So, all we have to do is trust in Jesus and we'll be okay. Jesus makes everything okay for those who believe in him. He is our hope. He is our Savior. Okay. Is there any testimonies? Yeah.
They take that down.
I don't know where the mobile mic is.